Hello and welcome to a 10 minutes to 10 where we are going to be drilling into some of the various tools in Xero. Now today we're going to be looking at the sales orders and we're going to be looking at the underlying process because it's all well and good having a system and this functionality is available, but the reality is why would you use it and what's the value in actually using it? Now this section is massively value adding and it's one of those sections which actually I think sometimes gets overlooked, but there's many reasons why we should be using this. Now I'm just going to share my screen so you guys can see what I'm looking at and I can walk you through the various process of sales orders and most importantly let you know what the value add is in each stage. I'm just going to change the size of that because I've slightly oversized it. So first things first, we can access this through the business panel and we can go to quotes. This is where we're going to start our underlying process. Now, we have a various few stages within our quotes process. Now, I'm going to walk you through why we're doing this and the value add in each stage. So, firstly, if you've got multiple staff members, this means that actually you can have more than one staff member raising items for their clients. So they might have various portfolios they're working on and they can actually raise quotes. But the good part about it is you've got control all the way through this process. So they might only be able to see quotes or they might only be able to see invoices, but they can't see any of your reports. And they might only be able to push them through to a certain stage. So you might have, say, some of your sales consultants who can push it through to the right to the end of the awaiting approval phase. But then you might have management or you might have bookkeepers who come in and review that the invoice has all the data there to be invoiced to the customer officially and be finalized. Now, the best part about quotes is actually something that people take for granted. When we raise quotes in Xero, there's a process where the customer gets issued them and they can either decline them or they can accept them, as highlighted by these various tabs. Now, the main point of this is when a customer declines or accepts, it timestamps it. It lets us know who's accepted it or declined it. And if it's declined, we get a note to say why it has been declined. But most importantly, when it's accepted, the client has actually agreed to our actual valuations on the invoice. They've agreed to the terms and conditions, assuming we've assigned these in our invoice branding, and they've agreed to any payment terms if we've also indicated these as well. So it's hugely important because the amount of times I've seen clients just issue an invoice and if you get queries, it's a pain in the bum because you might get a customer who said wrong address, please amend. You've got to re-amend it. That adds a few more extra days to you receiving payment because they have to process it again. They might contest the amount, they query the amount, they withhold payment. It's painful. So this is why we do the quotes and we get the acceptance stage here. Now, I'm just going to make a new quote and show you how the process works. So imagine I'm one of the sales consultants and I'm making a quote for one of our clients. This works exactly the same way as any other invoicing aspect in Xero. So we can set it up in much the same way. And actually, I am going to raise a quote to Bayside Club. And I'm going to put a date on it. Actually, I'm going to issue the quote now. So I'm just going to leave it as is. And importantly, I put expiry date. This is really value adding if we've got prices of products which change. So if I'm buying in goods from, say, overseas, or they've got different valuation because of exchange rate, the exchange rates can fluctuate, of course, as we all know. And what I'm actually doing is saying, look, I'll give you this offer, but in 14 days, this offer is going to expire. If by then you haven't accepted it, the quote may well change because the value may have changed of my costs and I want to pass them on. So you may or may not use it. If you can actually just leave it blank. It's fine. Now, this is the part where we can save time for our staff members. We can add item codes in our inventory, so to make sure basically the coding convention is consistent, the description is nice and detailed, and most importantly, the unit price is a standardized term so that we don't have any pricing discrepancies. They can, of course, override these if they need to, or they can apply discounts if they've agreed them, but what we can identify is that there's consistency here. We can also assign projects. So if we're using tracking codes, I might assign this to, say, Project East, because it's one of the projects that I personally am working on. We can include attachments. We can change branding themes. So we might have, say, different invoice templates for different customers. Say one that might be specific to a sterling account holder and one might be unique to someone who's paying in US dollars because they might pay into a different bank account. So that's the reason we might have those. And most importantly, we have our terms. We can assign these in our invoice settings. These are the big things of quotes, which are, in my opinion, absolute lifesavers, because if they haven't agreed to your terms and conditions and you can't evidence that, it can cause no end of trouble when you're trying to resolve disputes. Now, I'm going to save this as a draft. It might be that actually me as a staff member, this is a work in progress. I want to be able to review this and amend this. But actually, I come in as another staff member now, and I've been working on one for Rex Media Group, and actually, I'm happy to resolve this. And it's ready to send. I'm going to send this to the client because I've got everything on it. I've checked everything, and I want to send them. So I am going to physically send this to the client, which in this particular example is going to be myself. So just imagine that I'm called something different, pronounce my name differently for just visualize I'm a different user, because it's important for this next stage, because I'm just going to show you how this works. Now, I have a various set of stages in my quote stage. I've just moved one from the draft stage to the sent stage. So it's moving along our process, and we can see how we're coming along with each of our quotes, which is helpful if you're management, because you want to see what's going on and understand where we are with various quotes. Very useful for pipeline management, because we can identify what's due to come in and where we are in the process. Now, this quote has been sent, and I can see by the notes activity who it's been sent to. Now, let's just imagine this is actually some guy called Bob. This has actually been sent to him, and he's gone into his email address. And what he'll have is an option to either mark as accepted or mark it as declined. Now, really important here is I'm going to show you what happens if they've marked it as declined, because it's important to see what you can do with it. So let's say they've marked it as declined. They've just said, I want a book as well. So basically, we've missed something off the quote. That's a very rude way of saying it, but let's say they've just said, I want a book as well. So now we have a quote which has moved out of sent and has moved into declined. And it helps if I don't click back and actually click into what I'm going into. So this has now moved along even further. And when we look at the quote, we'll see once again that the history is developed. It's sent, it's been declined. We can see what time it's been declined. We can see the comment that the client has left. So we know exactly what we need to change and why. Now, good part about quotes is I don't have to go into this and start it all again if I don't want to. It might be at this point in time they just say, I don't want it. I might just delete it so I don't have the record. But actually, I personally think I would leave the quotes and decline so you know for KPIs, how many have been accepted, how many have been declined. Really value adding, because actually if lots of your quotes are getting declined, the question is why? Is there a flaw with the process? Is there something else that's going amiss? So I personally wouldn't delete any of these. Instead, what I would do is if the client's asked for something else, we can unmark it as declined. And most importantly, when we're doing this, make sure we actually resolve the issue there and then. Otherwise, it looks like it's something it just gets back and forth. But what I'm actually going to do is revise this quote. So they've declined it initially. I'm going to go in. They've requested a book. Very rudely, mind you, but they've requested a book. So I'm just going to update this. Now, what I have is an updated quote where I can still see the history of the fact that they declined it. I've gone in, I've revised it. I've sent it to the client again now. I love the way it's given me a default email this time, but it didn't last time. But I'm just going to use me. So, once again, I've sent it. Because obviously I've moved it out, declined, and it's sent again, the client's gone in. They've got the option to either mark it's accepted or mark it's declined. Now, at this point in time, they click the green button, and you'll get a notification that they've accepted the quote. You'll also get a record in the history to say who has approved it, when they approved it. And bear in mind, if this is a user outside of your Xero organization, it will just say the email address. So you do have a record of exactly who's approved it and when, which is massively useful because they have actually agreed to our terms and conditions by agreeing to this stage. They've also confirmed at this point that the customer address is correct and that actually everything on the invoice is a value of which they agree to. So the theory is much less chance of disputes unless they find a problem with the product when it's delivered. So we've covered ourselves for a variation of issues. Really, really helpful. Now, because they've accepted it, I'm actually now going to create this as an invoice. So we might have had one staff member get to this stage, and then this is the point where management come in and go, right, okay, I'm going to create the invoice. You might have the sales consultant create it. It's entirely up to you. But when I go to create this invoice, I have the option to either mark it as invoiced or just leave it as is. Now, I'm going to mark it as invoice because this changes the status. And I'll show you in a second. For now, I'm just going to literally assign our standard payment terms, which are 14 days, which they've already agreed to in my terms. That is worth so much to so many businesses, because the amount of times you get businesses, and some companies will pay on 30 days, some companies will pay on 45 days, but make sure you specify your due date either way, because you want it to be crystal clear what your payment terms are. Now I'm just going to save this as draft so I can come to it in a little bit. And I'm just going to reload my quotes tab, because now we've got our declined invoice, went back to sent, went to accepted, and most importantly is now in the invoiced section. So I have just approved a lovely invoice for Rex Media Group. Now, if I go into it from the quotes section, I can see that it was actually marked as invoiced, but more importantly, it was actually copied to an invoice. So this is like a sense check to make sure that actually all of your quotes, when they're marked as invoiced, they are actually invoiced. And the best part about it is if you do it from here, you get a little link to the actual invoice in question, which I'm going to follow through to. So now we have a new process. We essentially have the quotes process. And if we want to add a bit more depth to this as well, we can, because if I go to sales overview, you can see in here we've got all draft, awaiting approval, awaiting payment, paid, etc. Now this is a additional stage, so you can have more than one stage. I could have a quote stage, which I've done. Now, any invoices in draft are items which are probably being worked on at this point in time, or we can be really, really clever with these. So if you're one of these businesses who perhaps takes a deposit, you may request 50% deposit. When you've issued them the quote, they might not have issued the deposit just yet. Say they're perhaps lagging behind a little bit. And during this stage, we've got this invoice which is really ready to be issued, but they need to pay you the 50% deposit. Now, what you can do at this point in time is actually issue the invoice from draft. Now, I'm just going to preview this to show you why. Because if I issue an invoice from draft, depending on what invoice settings I've got set up, I might actually have the naming convention to be, say, Forma invoice or sales order. And what it basically means is I can add a little caveat at the bottom of my draft invoices to say, this is not a VAT invoice. Please do not claim VAT on it because it's not a finalized document. And what that actually means is that we can issue invoices from draft and keep them as a work in progress. If we're registered on the VAT scheme for the accrual scheme, we're not obligated to pay the VAT until the invoice is physically delivered and finalised. And most importantly, we can actually start chasing the customer for funds, because we've got that little bit of a bargaining chip of actually, when this deposit is paid, we'll then give you the invoice and you can recover the VAT. So it's helpful. But also, as well as that, this is a really useful way with those big suppliers to request purchase order numbers, because through the quote stage, if they haven't provided you one yet, and actually they needed to approve internally, get the purchase order, you can email them a pro forma and say, please do provide us a purchase order number for this invoice. Because otherwise, if you send the invoice, they'll just reject it and say, where's the purchase order number? And you'll say, yep, didn't ask. So multiple stages there, which are really helpful. Now, because we've got this stage here where actually we might have different access levels for our users. If I'm a consultant and I only have restricted access, I might not have the option to physically approve this depending on how we've set up my user rights, but I might be able to save it and submit it for approval. Now, this gives us one more step and one more control within our process, because I can move a draft to awaiting approval. Now, from here, imagine you're a management staff or you're a bookkeeper and you come in to view it, and It might be your job to just double check the coding conventions, double check the customer details, check that they've got an email address, check the due dates, check that a project has been assigned. This means that actually the staff member's done all they can do, it's ready to go, and we can just do some final sense checks to make sure, yep, when we post it to our accounts, it's sitting in the right buckets. So imagine I am a management staff now, and I'm looking at this invoice, and I'm going, yep, it is sales. Oh, actually, we did change our coding convention recently. And actually, this desktop support should be to sales IT support. Now, it might just be that actually book fish out of water is going to sales other as well. It might be that I haven't changed my item defaults and these are just set to the default standard, which I'd set up before I changed my coding convention. Might also be that actually they forgot to assign a project. Naughty, naughty. I might ask them what the project is they're working on. They let me know it's Project East and I can assign them before I approve the invoice. So when it comes to this stage, everything is done and I'm happy to approve it. When I click this button is when it impacts my profits and loss report. So until this point in time, it hasn't been posted in the wrong place. It hasn't impacted my P&L. It's now moved into my waiting payment and it's now going to show my age receivables list. So what we have is a collection of controls between quotes, awaiting approval, etc. And what we have is a really watertight process. Handy if you've got multiple staff members. Now, what you might find is actually if you're a smaller organization where perhaps you don't need quite as many levels of control, you can use just this section and use drafts to issue performer invoices to ask for approval, or you might just use the quote section and just approve it straight to an invoice afterwards without going through the awaiting approval phase in the sales invoice process. If you have a bigger team, very value adding to use both. Now, it seems like, because I just walked through it here, it might seem like a lot of processes to go through because you go 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, etc. You've got like 4 or 5 steps to your invoices. But what this means is that at each step, firstly, staff members confirmed it. Secondly, client has confirmed it. Really important part. Then thirdly, the customer, sorry, the consultant might have gone back in and said, yeah, okay, they've accepted this. This is good to go. Please do process it. And you got fourth control where the management or the bookkeeper can check and go, okay, from our management accounts perspective, these should be coded as so. And what it gives us is a really high level depth where we're making sure nothing is missed, everything is agreed to. We reduce the chance of disputes. We make it easier to chase the customer for the actual payment because they've agreed to our terms. We've collected purchase order numbers. We might have actually, basically there's just a collection of items. We might have also provided them various attachments which give them details behind the order, etc. So massively value adding. And if you aren't using sales orders yet, I would encourage you to investigate them and see if there's something which would benefit you, because I personally feel that sales orders quotes would benefit most businesses, because one of the most painful things is when you issue an actual finalized invoice, you get disputes, payments get delayed, you have to raise credit notes, you have to edit invoices. Oh no, I shouldn't have edited the invoice because it needs a new invoice number, so I should have credited the first one, raised a new invoice, and yada yada yada. And then also, if you've got if you're VAT registered on the accrual scheme, depending on how long it takes you to resolve this, you might actually find you're paying VAT on an invoice which is still in dispute, but you cannot reclaim the VAT until the credit note is issued, or based on HMRC's terms, we go over the 3-month mark, which is pain in the bum because you have to wait a very long time if it is a bad debt. We do not want bad debts. But before you can recover VAT, remember it's 90 days, which is painful. Yeah, so long time. So please do look at sales orders and apply them to your business so that we can avoid these nasty surprises. Now, I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for joining us today. If you did enjoy this video and you found it helpful, please do let us know in the comments, and likewise, if you have any queries, also please feel free to let us know. And I hope to catch you guys again soon. Take care. Bye.